Got to be very honest with you. First of all, when I was in school, I never thought in my life I would become an author. Least of all, a #1 New York Times best-selling author, which is what happened in Disloyal. And I go back in time and I start thinking about, oh my gosh, why did I even write Disloyal? Well, I actually wrote Disloyal simply to pass time, because in prison, time management is everything. I mean, if you don't have good time management skills, 24 hours could feel like 240 hours. The hardest part about being in prison was, as I talk about in this book, revenge. I didn't belong there. And what I talk about is exactly what happened to me. And most people don't even know the real story. Everybody talks about Michael Cohen. Everybody has an opinion. They have, some idea in terms of who I was, what I was. I was not. Let me be very clear. I was not Ray Donovan skulking around the city with a baseball bat, hitting people with it as the media would like to have portrayed me. What did I do? I sued people. I sued people on behalf of Donald Trump. I was a lawyer. And that's exactly what we do. Now, some of the cases were, let's just say, less than on the up and up. It was a way for Donald to take advantage of his economic power, the fact that there were a dozen lawyers in the firm, in the office over at the Trump Organization, and it was generally contractors. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're a terrible human being. You're horrible. Look how many people that you hurt. Well, with all due respect to a lot of the people that got hurt, some of them were really lousy contractors, right? And the things that they had done were improper, and we did what anybody else would do. We used the law, not baseball bats, not golf clubs. And the notion that we have to make Donald Trump into Don Corleone and everybody that works for him is a consigliere or something to that effect, it's just not accurate. Fast forward all that, I do end up coming out of Otisville. And I do have to tell you, even though it was what's known as Camp Cupcake, I never saw a single cupcake while I was there. And that really upset me. I was first told, hey, you're going to Camp Cupcake. Great. I love cupcakes. Just make sure there's some black coffee. I'm going to be perfect. Unfortunately, there was none. And it's very hard. Being away from your family, your friends, losing your law license, your family's happiness, everything. It is absolute torture. The entire judicial system needs an overhaul. So who was with me? Well, I had an actor, Mike the Situation, was there. It was absolutely a riot watching Jersey Shore. About half a dozen doctors, orthopedists, podiatrists, you name it. We had at least 24 lawyers. Billy McFarland from Fire Festival was there for a short while. We had accountants galore. My bunkie was a forensic accountant. We would talk constantly about the case and why. So going now to revenge, I want to really fast forward it here. Oh, before I get there, the unconstitutional remand, making me the very first political prisoner. Hello, everybody. Should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. I am the very first political prisoner held in my country because I failed to waive my First Amendment constitutional right, which is exactly what happened. This nonsense by Fox News. Oh, I was at Bill Bouquet eating a steak. It's 800 feet from my home, and I was permitted to be exactly where I was because I was on a furlough. So I get lured, and I talk about this in the book, I get lured down to 500 Pearl Street, which is the criminal case. And I'm saying, why are they sending me there? I'm supposed to go to the Bronx like everybody else for an ankle monitor. And a guy named Adam Pikula, who works there, says to me, no, we want you coming here. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go there. But something didn't smell right, didn't feel right. So I asked a buddy of mine who was a friend of mine since we were about the age of 14, also a lawyer, just to join me because I wanted a second set of eyes. We get there and they hand me two pieces of paper. It didn't look like standard government types document, which is something that looks like it's been photocopied 600 times. You could barely read it. And you could, luckily, if you figure out where exactly, your name is supposed to go. It was designed specifically for me. And the very first paragraph of it was that I would not publish the book. I would not do a movie. I would not speak to the press. I would not speak to the media, that my family would not speak to the media or the press, that my friends would not speak to it. And I said, wait, this is a violation of my First Amendment constitutional right. I mean, could we tamp down?
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you are doing great from wherever you're watching us from. The video that you're about to watch is a video that reveals the truth about Mr. Donald Trump and how he sabotages the people that he doesn't agree with, like ideologically. Michael Cohen is a victim of Mr. Donald Trump, and here in this video, he's going to be sharing his story. Remember, Michael Cohen's revelation about Donald Trump's manipulation of the U.S. Department of Justice stands as one of the most draining insider accounts of corruption and political abuse in modern American history. Cohen, once a Trump personal attorney and loyal fixer, witnessed firsthand how Trump transformed the Justice Department from an institution meant to uphold the law into a tool to protect his personal power and punish his enemies. In his writings and congressional testimonies, Cohen explains that Trump did not see the presidency or the Department of Justice as an instrument of democracy. Rather, he saw it as a way of extending his will. The abuse of power exposed how fragile America's democratic institution can be when placed in the hands of man who views loyalty as more important than the law. So, brothers and sisters, I'm inviting you to watch this video. It's called Michael Cohen, and I hope you all get to learn from his testimony. He's a person that confesses a lot of things that happened inside the Trump circle. And I think this video is important because it's going to be explaining that side of your president that you don't honestly know. So let's watch the video. You know, I'm your host and presenter, Agent Stories. And if you're watching me for the first time, you know, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership, and really get to work on offer you. But until then, let's watch the video. I'll be back with my thoughts in regards to this.
Some of this language. And they said, sure. Okay, great. So they have me sit with my lawyer friend, Jeff, in the waiting area. And so I sit and I wait. And it was very sad because my son, who at the time was 21, was waiting for me in the front. He had come in from college, and it was rough. So he was sitting in the front, and all of a sudden, about an hour later, three gigantic guys, I mean, humongous federal marshals with handcuffs and shackles. And this was an experience that I don't even know how to characterize. They put me in a freezer. It was a room that must have been 40 degrees. You're wearing a very thin outfit. And it was absolutely horrific for about 3.5 hours, to the point that you're chattering so hard your teeth feel like they're going to fall out of your head, until they pull you out into a room which is like 80 degrees, 90 degrees. So your body can't acclimate for the temperature. And then they put you back into the freezer. So it's all a lot of mental torture. They run you around. I'm handcuffed and shackled. For what? For what? Even assuming that I had done what was alleged and what I had pled to. We're going to get to that. Who gets handcuffed and shackled? I mean, this is a white collar. I'm not Hannibal Lecter. I was the former personal attorney to the president, which could be similar, but it's not exactly the same. And I think that the extent to which they went, this was all done at the direction of Donald J. Trump. So people turn around and they say, well, you know, why would you say that? How can you possibly say that? Well, I'm the first person to get lured away from GEO, which is the re-entry system that's used, and sent over to 500 Pearl Street, given a document that was definitively written for me, though denied, and I get thrown back only to have people from Otisville there to drive me back. Now, what's amazing is today, there was an article that came out from, and it's an online newspaper called Ross Story. And the author, a young lady by the name of Sarah K. Burris, wrote, Michael Cohen's lawyer sent this memo days ahead of the SDNY shakedown. And it talks about it into my new book. And I really had something that I was going to go into more until I read this while I was on the train coming in today. And I just found it so fascinating that it took a small online newspaper to actually really get the story right. It's to me, again, is amazing. Michael Cohen's lawyer, Guy Petrillo, penned a letter to Deputy U.S. Attorney Robert Kazami that is featured at the end of Cohen's new book, asking for a meeting to discuss the Cohen case and the grand jury. This was, to me, the craziest thing. 4.5 months post the raid. And we have no idea what they're talking about. What are the charges that are being brought against me? Now, to anybody who knows me in the past, I don't drink. I don't do drugs. Never did. I mean, I even went through college here at American University, fraternity. I never had a beer. And I've really tried to live, not like a priest, but rather like an average person. I have one speeding ticket in my entire life. I've never had a parking ticket. All of a sudden, I'm confronted with 40 or 50 federal agents at the hotel, my home, which was 2 blocks away, so I was not on the lam, as some of the newspapers put it. I was 2 blocks at the most visited hotel, the Lowe's Regency in New York City. I had them at the bank, where I had a safety deposit box because obviously my apartment was under renovation. We were flooded out by my next door neighbor. And also my law office, where there were another 20 or so federal agents. And it was an overwhelming experience. And for 4.5 months, we're asking the Southern District of New York, and my former attorney, Guy Petrillo, was the former head of the criminal division of the Southern District of New York. I mean, this guy wore the big boy pants in the Southern District, aka the Sovereign District of New York. And I want to be very clear, I have no love for these guys at all. So now we sit there and we're really frustrated. 4.5 months, I can't get an answer. What are you looking for? Let me know. If there's something I can help you with, no problem, right? Well, nope, no answer. Until finally my attorney decides that he's going to send a letter. It was at my request to them. We'd really like to know. We'd like a sit down. Well, they decide that they're going to have a sit down, but I won't be included into it. It was on a Friday. Okay, so he asked me if it's all right. I said, absolutely, it's okay. Now go ahead and call me when the meeting is over, which is exactly what he did. 5:30 p.m. on a Friday night, we find out exactly what it is. That I have until Monday to plead guilty to tax evasion, misrepresentation to a bank, as well as campaign finance violation, or we're filing a 58-page indictment against you that's going to include your wife. Now, anybody knows I live for my family, and there was no way in the world that I was going to allow anything to happen to my wife. It was just our 28th anniversary a couple of days ago. There's no chance in the world I was going to let them do to her what my attorney told me that they were going to do. They were going to perp walk us out on a Monday. So I had no documents. I had nothing. First time in my life having any issue with law. I've never, and I go into the book here. So I see someone just walked in, Lanny Davis, who was my lawyer and so on. Thank you, Lanny. And Lanny went wild. I'm so glad you walked in. Perfect timing. You can't, Lanny, why don't you come take a seat so I can see your pretty face there. So, come on. Let's go. Lanny, we're all waiting. We're all waiting. No, that's Barbara's. All right, anyway. So, Lanny goes crazy. He goes, this makes absolutely no sense. I mean, and we create a PowerPoint presentation that shows that there are elements in law to tax evasion, which is one of the things that I was given that I had to plead. And they wrote the allocution and everything. I spent more time going over the allocution, how I was to answer to the judge, than was spent on my entire case. There was no case that was brought against me. I pled guilty to a 1-page information. And you'll see as I go through the book, it's very easy for someone to turn around, point a finger and say, well, yeah, it's your story. You can tell it any way that you want. In fact, we have FBI agents that were involved, starting with the earliest, which you may all remember, the Mueller report. The Steele dossier. The Steele dossier, as it related to me, 11 allegations raised against me. Not one of them is true. I do not have a dacha in Sochi next door to Putin. My father-in-law is not the largest real estate developer in Moscow, though I wish he was. In fact, he's never been to Moscow. He's Ukrainian. And they came to this country in 1973 because of anti-Semitism. All right. Then, on top of that, the claim that I went to Prague, which I've never been to Prague. I would like to. I hear it's beautiful, but I've never been. And I went with $10 million in cash in order to pay off a group of compromats on behalf of Paul Manafort. Truth be told, I wouldn't pay 3 cents for Paul Manafort. So none of this made any sense. Tax evasion, and I talk about it in the book. I've never not paid my taxes. I've never not filed taxes. I've had a CPA my entire life that I paid. Every single dollar I ever earned was in Capital One Bank that, by coincidence, was located at the base of the building that I live in. Not one single element of tax evasion existed in my case. Well, okay, what am I going to do? Put my wife at risk? The answer to that was no. There was no way in the world that I can do this. And from a Friday to a Monday, 48 hours, you don't do it, this is what's going to happen. This is what I refer to as the weaponization of the Justice Department. Donald Trump set the whole thing up. Why? Well, as soon as our relationship started coming to an end and I refused to do certain things that they would want me to do, which of course was to stay quiet, that they wanted me to just accept the punishment, move on. Basically, as I had once said stupidly to Vanity Fair, that I would take a bullet for Trump. I probably would have, except for the fact that he was the guy pulling the trigger. And for me, that was a real problem. To make a long story short, Sarah goes on in the book Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the United States Department of Justice Against His Critics. It walks through what Cohen describes as the dogged way in which Donald Trump used the government to make his life miserable, attack him, threaten his family, and ultimately land him in prison for a number of crimes Cohen explains that he never committed. The next one after these crazy tax evasion cases, yes, there was an error. I acknowledged it, and I paid that money. One thing that that Guy Petrillo was able to get the judge, William H. Pauley III, to acknowledge, I never owed a single dollar to any bank, to any banking institution, or any individual ever. There's no economic crime. So, again, how could you have a tax evasion? What it was a tax omission, and I paid the money before sentencing, but I got zero credit for that also. Then the next one, which was the HELOC violation. Do you all know what a HELOC is? The home equity line of credit. I have 80% equity in my home. I had more money sitting in the bank than my mortgage plus the HELOC combined. And somewhere down the line, they turn around and they're now holding me that I misrepresented myself to the bank. I mean, I've been doing business with this bank. I had 6 buildings. I had 197 apartments. I had, 52 taxi medallions between New York City. I mean, I had worked very hard over the course of the early part of my life. I didn't work for Donald Trump because I needed Donald's job or I needed his money. I was semi-retired at the age of 39. And somehow, like so many people in America, I fell under the spell of this cult leader. And I did things that I never should have done, including the Stormy Daniels. One of the things, sir, that you mentioned in the intro of me, that I had paid off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. I never paid Karen McDougal. I was charged for it. I pled guilty to it. I was fined $50,000 that I paid for it. I never paid Karen McDougal. David Pecker did from AMI, the National Enquirer. I was just asked by Donald to look over the documents as a lawyer to make sure that his ass was protected in the event that David ended up going to Time Magazine, where he was supposed to be the next CEO and editor-in-chief. But somehow they needed to get David out of that too. Because why? Well, Michael was going to be the fall guy. Anything that was negative, anything that was wrong, just point your finger at Cohen. It's all right. Everybody started doing it. All of a sudden, you had Michael Avenatti doing the same thing. Now, all of a sudden, I'm skulking around Nevada looking for Stormy Daniels while she's holding a baby and they're going to some Pilates class. And I'm saying to myself, what next? What next? It was, and you're not allowed to say anything. If anybody's ever had any sort of an issue and you have a lawyer, the lawyer will say, judges hate. The judges hate when you speak. You can't do that. You have to stay quiet, stay home, do nothing. Okay, and so I did that. What happened? I end up with the 36 months. I was saying to myself at the time of the hearing, 36 months for what? And I couldn't believe it. I was so angry that I was forced to read this allocution that was prepared for me that I bit my inner lip so hard, and it was like you could see that I was playing with my side of my cheek because I was so angry that I bit myself, and I was just beyond nauseous watching as my father, who is at the time 84, Holocaust survivor, came, 4 children, all of us are lawyers. He's a head and neck reconstructive surgeon. My mom's a surgical nurse. We don't come from a family of mafiosa like they tried to say. I know people when I was a kid who were in the mob, absolutely, right? And so on, who didn't, right? I'm from New York. I mean, for God's sakes, it was crazy, but we never, we weren't part of any family. This is absolutely okay. Maybe now and then they give us a discount on some meat or something like that, but for God's sakes, it was crazy. All of a sudden, everybody's pointing their finger at Cohen, and I just became the fall guy for everything. Well, interesting, there's an old expression that the 3 things that will always rise: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And that's what's happening each and every day. More and more information seems to be dripping out. Now, for God's sakes, I wish the spigot would open and it would just flood out. It would make my life so much easier. Drip, drip, drip. We see Jeffrey Berman came out with a book. For God's sakes, this guy did one of 2 things improv. Either what he did, his actions are unethical, or they're illegal. He was contacted by Bill Barr's office, and they put pressure on him in order to expunge Donald's name and to pull back the charges against me and the plea that I had made to the Southern District of New York so that they could whitewash the document. And he did still whitewash it. Instead of the 40 pages, it was 20 pages. This is not the way government is supposed to work. And I just scratched my head and I say, where was this guy for 5 years? Well, okay, right. He needs to hold on to that information so that he could write a book. And I'm saying to myself, this is absolutely improper. It's like Brady material that they withheld that I could have used. Well, is that going to change anything? No. Why? Because I already did my time, and now I'm just on a supervised release that hopefully will be over very, very soon also. Sometimes you wake up and you wonder, whose life is this? Because I know that this wasn't mine, right? Yes, I had worked, I had built myself a life and a wonderful family, and I was enjoying every single day of waking up. And I can honestly tell you, from that day of that federal raid to today, there is no happiness anymore. There's no joy. I fight every day to put on a smile, to enjoy myself. I try to do it so that my children don't see, an unhappy father who's just dedicated. But one of the things that I also put into this book, because I think it's extremely, extremely important, is some issues regarding the media. The media gives Donald Trump too much attention. Whatever it is that he opens his mouth, he says he could burp, it's going to be all over the news. And it's absolutely horrific. I mean, we are the ones that are building this guy up. The sentencing report that I wrote with Petrillo and Lanny as well, it laid everything out. And I spoke to so many people in the media, some who I've known for over 2 decades, friends. I call these people friends. And I would ask them, did you read the Petrillo sentencing memo? Because the story that you're writing in the paper is wrong. And facts matter, truth matters, accuracy matters. But the media didn't see it that way. Like I said, I've never been to Prague, right? I can't tell you the number of journalists that wrote. Michael Cohen told me he was in Prague. No, Michael was in Los Angeles with his son, who was hoping to play baseball as a lefty pitcher for USC. And they went to USC and they asked the coach, and he said, yeah, they were here. And then the day after, I was on TMZ. I was on set with Harvey Levin, who's also a friend. And you can't be in 2 places at the same time. People say, oh, you look so familiar. I'm like, it's possible. I don't know, everybody's got a doppelganger, but I've never been to Prague. And no matter how many times that you want to say it, I never have. And then it just explodes there, from the Steele dossier all the way to The unconstitutional remand, I mean, that was even more horrific than the first time around. But I wanted to lay out in this book, Revenge, which is, I believe I accomplished, I wanted to lay out the story of not just what happened to me. That's already happened. It's done. It's over. I have my own internal healing that I have to deal with on a daily basis. If Donald Trump, if Ron DeSantis, for Josh Hawley, Marjorie Taylor Greene, any one of these MAGA morons, just if they take power again, they now have the playbook on what it means in order to turn this country into an autocracy. The way you make a country, the way you turn a country into an autocracy, the first thing that you do is you take away people's First Amendment rights, their free speech, and you create a state-run television, media, newspapers, and so on, like Fox News. All right, that's just what they do. What do you do after that? Well, then you weaponize a group of people. You take over the military. Those are the two things that we saw. We saw January 6th, and we saw what happened to me. I believe it was a test run. And I believe that the next person is going to take Donald's failures, because they are both failures, take them and figure out how to make them into successes. We've already seen what's going on with Roe. We see what's going to be happening with Obergefell and a series of other cases. The Supreme Court is out of control. Things that we have grown up with 50 years, for example, of Roe as stare decisis, all of a sudden gone. And where's the outrage? Okay, yeah, so a couple of days we see people shutting down the streets, picketing, yelling at members of Congress. That's not enough. It's not enough. There has to be a movement, and we need to ensure that come November that we make sure that these people are no longer there. Because, and this is what I say in the book, what happened to me can happen to any one of you, can happen to every one of you, will certainly happen to a slew of people who are on Donald's hit list, his enemies list. And I can tell you, that hit list is probably longer than any scroll that we saw from King Tut's, tomb. I can promise you that. He hates everybody that doesn't sit there and flatter him and praise him. I know I blew smoke up his ass for over a decade. So I promise you, it's funny. We could laugh about him. He is an absolute cartoon character. When we first started the campaign was never supposed to be legitimate. It never was. It was supposed to be the greatest infomercial in the history of U.S. politics. I've said it on television a dozen times because it's true. When he got into the office, he realized what power was. He tasted a power that he had never tasted before, despite the fact, he was obviously the ruler of the 25th and 26th floor of Trump Tower. But nothing like this before. The most powerful man on the planet. And he refused to give it up. And that's why I said when I testified before the House Oversight Committee, my biggest fear, and one of the reasons why I'm here today testifying, at tremendous cost to me and my family in terms of danger and peril and our lives. My biggest fear is that if Donald Trump loses the election, that there will never be a peaceful transfer of power. That's a statement that we hear every single day in the press. Sadly, we hear this every single day in the press. But that came from my mouth going back 4.5 years ago. And I'm not prescient. I'm not Nostradamus. I just know the man. And I'm telling you right here, right now, today, in this marvelous bookstore, that if Donald Trump or any of his acolytes end up taking office or power, the America that we know, the democracy that we have, will be gone. And we will never get it back. So, blue wave.
So, Michael, you ready for some audience questions?
Oh, do I love questions.
All right, we got about 7 or 8 here. The first one asks, as Trump's former lawyer, how do you balance the obligation to protect client confidential information and the attorney-client privilege with the need to disclose what Trump was doing?
It's a difficult question. As it relates to attorney-client privilege, you may all remember that when they raided my home, they took 10 million documents. Oh, there's a great story. So all of a sudden I have 10 burner phones. No, 3 belonged to my daughter because, children, every year they have to get a new phone. And there were photos in them, and we didn't want to throw them away, and I'm technologically challenged. So I put them into a box in our apartment, right? So that one day we'll find somebody who will be able to put it up onto the cloud or whatever, onto a drive, because they're pictures of them when they were children. So there was no burner phones. These were old Apple iPhones. One of them was even a Palm Pilot. The ones that, I don't remember, there's some young people here, you wouldn't remember, but the Palm Pilot was the original one that used to put a battery in order to charge it. By the time the thing charged, the battery was dead. You had to keep going on and on. So it was never activated because it never worked. You couldn't get a battery to last long enough to keep the charge. These were the things. You may also remember when they allegedly got some very special documents that were in the shredder in my law office. It was garbage. I had filled up my garbage pail with garbage, and so I put it in the shredder in order to get rid of it. Envelopes and things like that. The United States paid over at Quantico to put those 18 or 20 pages back that the media ran. Oh, we've got it all. We've got it all. What'd you have? You had a bunch of envelopes that I threw into there. 18 pages. That's where our money went. Thank you, Quantico, for your technology. It's amazing. So how do you end up balancing it? There was a special master that went through the 10 million documents, and I spent 30 days with this law firm at McDermott, Will, and Emery in the city, going through documents, recordings, everything, to ensure that there was no attorney-client privilege and that nothing was between just attorneys. So if you have 2 attorneys and, say, Ivanka on the document on an email chain, there is no attorney-client privilege because having a non-attorney onto it breaks the privilege. Not to mention, Donald himself broke the privilege. He said, I don't care. Let him say whatever he wants. I have nothing to hide. Okay, great. You have nothing to hide. Now, look what's happening 3.5, 4 years later. We all know there was plenty to hide. There's also something called the crime fraud exception rule. And this is what the prosecutors do. They tell you everything is part of the crime fraud exception rule. So legitimately, you could fight till the end of time, and they will just continuously tell you, well, that's a crime, and under the crime fraud exception rule doesn't apply. So it's a very good question. It's a tough question. It's sort of something you have to take on an ad hoc basis. There were certain documents that were not released, and they weren't relevant to any of these cases, but they were attorney-client privileged, and so they weren't released. And I respected the attorney-client privilege. He owns the privilege, not me as the lawyer. But once, for example, Rudy Giuliani started coming out and lying and making statements about, oh, I transcribed this recording, and that's not what it says. Well, okay. Poor Rudy, right? What an absolute shame. America's mayor. Could you imagine? It's like America's embarrassment. So, I said, just do me a favor and please just listen to it. Listen to it yourself. And then it was given to CNN, and I think Chris Cuomo ended up putting it out there. And lo and behold, that was the end of that specific attorney-client privilege communication, even though it really wasn't. But it's on an ad hoc basis. It's a very circular answer.
All right, next question. Trump has a history of cheating people in his real estate career.
What?
So,
can you do me a favor? Start that one over. Read that again.
It's an assertion that Trump has a history of cheating people in his real estate career. So why do supporters of Trump ignore that?
Because they're stupid. As I was, there's no other way to describe it. I constantly refer to the Trump organization. It is the cult of Donald J. Trump. You walk into the Trump building on Fifth Avenue, his name is all over the place. You go into the elevator, its name is all over the place. You come up to the 26th floor, his name is everywhere. You're drinking the water, it's Trump ice. It's Trump, 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 and you just don't get away. You want to have lunch, you go down to the Trump grill or the Trump bar. Or you could even go and get to the Trump ice cream parlor that's down there. Everything is there. That is his world. And so, why do people follow him that are in Alabama or Arkansas or any of these other, sort of incredibly red states? I don't know the answer for it. There's something inherent. It's like an inherent racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism that this guy brings out in people, and they just want to express it. You know, this whole nonsense with the Second Amendment that you should have a right to own an AR-15, and if you take away someone's right for an AR-15, that means you're taking away their handguns, their shotguns, you're taking away their, you know, their ability to defend themselves. He manages to somehow appeal to the worst part of anyone, and they just latch onto it.
So this next question, has to do with one of the things that as you were saying before that you get accused of. Did you help launder Russian money for Trump?
No. In fact, I don't know if that's even a true statement about Trump laundering money. Remember, I started in 2006, 2007. This allegedly was in the 90s, when this happened. Eric Trump made the statement, and I think we should get him up here, and he should certainly be able to answer that, though at the time, I don't even think he was born. Look, the kids like their father are just stupid. There's no other way to... Eric is the dumbest of the top three, and it's really an absolute shame because he... Not only is he dumb, but he talks. So, if you're stupid, you should know that you're stupid and keep your mouth shut. It's about, my grandmother used to say that. You can't argue with stupid. Let them speak because they embarrass themselves. That's Eric. Now, Don, interestingly enough, happens to be inherently the smartest of them all. It's not Ivanka. Everybody thinks, oh, it's Ivanka. Oh, yeah, Ivanka, right? It's not Ivanka. She's the most prepared. She's the most phony like her father. But I believe Don is probably the smartest, but he's just, I don't know what happened to him. But for God's sakes, it's not the same Donald Jr. that I remember from when I was working there. He's lost his mind. And I have no idea what's caused it, but no, I don't believe that there was money laundering. In fact, we got to go back to the press on this one. The media made an allegation that my father-in-law, the big Russian mobster, right, who happens to be Ukrainian and was in the garment industry, he had a fabric dyeing company, until he ultimately retired, and not the Russian mobster that he was claimed to be by the press. Allegedly, my father-in-law loaned Donald Trump $100 million. I wish to God I knew where that money was today, but he loaned him $100 million to save him and his company. So I'll never forget, right after we read that, my mother-in-law turned around and said to my father-in-law, why didn't you ask me for permission? So it's comical. I mean, the press just makes up stuff. They go with it. Why? Because they're looking for those clicks. They're advertising money and so on. So I don't believe that there was any Russian money laundering in his apartment buildings, which are condominiums, and they're, the way you purchase them, like any piece of property, is called a fee simple absolute. That means that you actually own your block and lot number, not as opposed to a co-op where it's shares into that block and lot. Yes, there are Russians that own in there. Some of these Russians happen to be from Long Island that decided to move to New York. There are some. And we have the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a floor, for example, at Trump World Tower. Does that mean that, he was laundering money from the Saudis? It's New York. It's it's the melting pot of America. So yes, there are some, but it's a very small number. And when Eric came out and said, oh, we have, Russians and they're buying our properties, again, he's just stupid. And he was running his mouth in order to try to prove a point on somebody that may have said something that he found injurious to his daddy.
So this next questioner says he heard you somewhere earlier this week predict that Trump will be indicted and indicted soon. But this person says that for months, they've listened to other people predict that Trump would be indicted, and he hasn't been. And he says he hopes you're right. But why do you believe so strongly that an indictment will be soon?
Because this is really the first time that the Department of Justice has gotten involved. Merrick Garland has been very, very careful, slow walking. And I said this yesterday on CNN. He's been slow walking this, so it's like molasses through a strainer. It's hard to imagine. It's like a drip of. this is the first time, and thanks to Tish James, our great New York Attorney General. Now, that's a civil matter. That's just going to wipe him out financially. And she's going, I don't know if you saw today, she filed an injunction. She's so clever. She filed an injunction today against Donald so that he cannot move any of the assets and that he cannot hypothecate, transfer, sell any of these assets because they could be part of the settlement that would ultimately be due to New York pursuant to this civil case. But what she also did is she went ahead and she has now referred this to the Southern District of New York, to justice for tax evasion, which seems to me to be the low-hanging fruit. What are we doing? We should have done this from day number one. We all know that this tax evasion, they have now access to his tax returns due to that long litigation. That first was the lawsuit, then it was granted, and then he appealed, and then
Michael Cohen talks about one thing that stands out: weaponization of justice. And the idea that Trump turned the Department of Justice into a political weapon rather than an independent body. Traditionally, the DOJ operates with a degree of separation from the White House to prevent political interference in the investigation of prosecutions. Trump, however, constantly pressured the Justice Department official to investigate his opponents and shield his allies. Cohen recalls how Trump would privately demand investigation into figures such as Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and journalists critical of his administration, reflecting an authoritarian impulse to use law enforcement for personal vengeance. This distortion of justice marked a dangerous erosion of democratic norms. And so you understand how this was being operated. You need to understand that Cohen also details how Trump demanded personal loyalty over constitutional duty. It's like a one-man circus. It's not about you. It's not about the Americans. It's about he himself as a person, right? Now, from everyone around him, in Cohen's words, Trump viewed loyalty as a one-way street. He expected total devotion from his subordinates, but offered none in return. This mindset extended into the Justice Department, where Trump often tested officials like former Attorney General Jeff Sessions or William Barr, rewarding those who protect him and humiliating those who acted independently. This environment of fear and obedience created a culture where truth and legality were secondary to Trump's ego. Cohen describes this as the hallmark of mob boss mentality, where the president viewed himself as a servant of the people, but as the head of an organization demanding absolute allegiance. Also, a central theme in Cohen's work is Trump's obsession with revenge and control. The Department of Justice was used to intimidate critics, suppress investigations, and shield Trump from accountability. For example, Cohen recounts how Trump sought to use his influence to minimize the impact of the Mueller's investigation into Russian interference. He pressured officials to publicly declare his innocence, interfered with witnesses, and tried to label any investigations into his conduct as a witch hunt. This manipulation of perception was strategic. Trump wanted to convince his followers that the truth was whatever he said it was, thereby discrediting legitimate legal proceedings. In doing so, he weakened public faith in the rule of the law itself, right? Also, another thing that I would like to address is that Cohen also highlights the psychological warfare Trump waged against ordinary citizens of America. Ordinary citizens through misinformation and intimidation. By consistently attacking institutions like the FBI, the courts, and the press, Trump created an environment of distrust. Many Americans began to believe that the Justice Department was corrupt. not because it was acting unjust, but because Trump told them so whatever he held him accountable. The erosion of trust made citizens vulnerable to manipulation, dividing the country between those who believe in facts and those who believe in Trump's narrative. And so it's happening until today. Cohen argues that this was not accident. It was calculated political strategy to create chaos where only Trump's authority seemed so much stable. Also, the consequences for ordinary citizens were so much severe. Remember that as Trump politicized the Justice Department, marginalized communities and dissenters felt the weight of selective justice. Immigration policies were enforced with cruelty, protesters were criminalized, and whistleblowers were vilified. Cohen observes that the DOJ under the Trump became less of a guardian of right and more of a weapon of fear. For example, the federal agents were deployed against peaceful protests in American cities. Journalists were threatened, and those who criticized Trump online faced harassment from his base. Often, with Trump's encouragement, citizens found themselves caught in a political system that no longer protected them, but punished them for speaking truth to power. Also, Cohen's reflection also exposes how Trump's disdain for truth corrupted the nation's moral fabric. You understand that in Cohen's book called Disloyal, he explains that Trump didn't just lie, he built an empire of deception where everyone around him was expected to lie on his behalf. The Justice Department, meant to uphold truth and integrity, was pressured to bend facts and suppress inconvenient evidence. Cohen compares this to life of an authoritarian regime, where reality itself is constantly rewritten to serve the ruler. Under Trump, facts became negotiable and law became conditional on loyalty. This inversion of truth posed a direct threat to democracy as it replaced reasoned governance with raw exercise of power. Also, another thing that I'd like to address is that in his congressional testimony, Cohen warned that Trump's corruption was not just personal, it was systemic. He cautioned that unless Trump's conduct was fully exposed and condemned, future leaders could follow the same path. The use of Justice Department to target enemies or protect allies set a precedent that undermines the independence of the judiciary. Cohen's warning was prophetic. Even after leaving office, Trump's influence continued to shape American politics, and many of his followers now view the justice system itself as illegitimate. The mistrust, Cohen argues, is one of Trump's most enduring legacies. A society where law is no longer respected because it was politicized. Because it was politicized by its highest enforcer. Also, another thing that I would like to address is that Cohen's transformation from Trump's enforcer to his accuser is itself a symbolic moral awakening in a corrupt system. He admits his own guilt in enabling Trump's abuses, describing how power seduced him into compromising his values. Yet his repentance underscores the larger message of his work. America must not worship the power at the expense of principle. Cohen's story reveals that authoritarianism does not begin with dictatorship. It begins with small compromises with citizens and officials who chose loyalty over conscience. His journey serves as both confession and a warning to American public. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that Michael Cohen's insight reveals how Donald Trump's presidency represented not just political dysfunction, but moral collapse. Because by weaponizing the Department of Justice, Trump attacked the very foundation of democracy, the rule of law. It turned justice into a game of loyalty, truth into propaganda, and the presidency into a shield for corruption. The citizen of the United States in turn became victims of a system where power, not fairness, determined justice. Cohen's message is both urgent and timeless. Democracy cannot survive when justice serves the ruler instead of the people. For America to heal, it must rebuild trust in institution. It must reclaim truth from manipulation and endure and ensure that they no longer leader, no matter how peaceful, can ever gain place himself above the law. So, with that being said, please let me know what you think and feel about this video. I'm your host and the presenter Agent Stories, and if you're watching me for the first time, you know I'm Ramscale. I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, please join the membership and really get to see what I can offer you. But until then, let me see you in my next video, on my next episode. Thank you guys for your time, thank you for everything, but until then, peace, love and harmony. Salute.